The Song of Arthur. The Dragon and the Sword.
You have returned, or perhaps this is your first step into these tales. Either way, the path leads only forward. When last we spoke, it was Nimue who guided your ear, a keeper of still waters and secrets older than stone. She told of my beginnings, of a birth unlike most. My mother, Ellen, a healer whose hands knew the language of earth and root. My father, well, not of this world's breath and bone. From such a union I came to be, marked by destiny before my first cry touched the wind. Albion was my cradle, its wilds my tutor. I walked paths where shadows speak and spirits watch, their eyes older than any man's memory. There were the She, beings who tested me with riddles and silence, and Kanunos, the horned one, who showed me that power is a river, never stagnant, never fully held, but flowing through all living things. These lessons bound me to the land and shaped my purpose, though I would come to know it as a burden as well as a gift. My journey took me to Vortigern's halls, where I spoke of dragons, red and white, locked in struggle beneath the earth, a vision of what was and what was to come. And there was Nimue, herself a river's whisper and the stillness of deep pools. Our paths intertwined, marked by both knowledge and a quiet, unspoken understanding. But that tale has had its breath, and now we must turn to another. To a king whose strength held the kingdom's fragile peace, yet whose heart kindled fires that even he could not control. Uther Pendragon, a man whose desires would shape Albion's fate, for better or worse.
Like and subscribe.
Power is a curious thing. It builds kingdoms, crushes armies, and bends the will of men. But more often than not, it's a double-edged blade. Uther Pendragon knew this well. He wielded power as a smith might wield a hammer, with force, precision, but often without pause for thought. Albion's lords followed him not out of love, but out of fear. They bent the knee because they knew what awaited those who didn't. Yet beneath this iron grip, cracks had already begun to form. Kingdoms, you see, are only as strong as the man who holds them together. And Uther, he was a man with many flaws. It is true that ambition drove him. He sought to bring order to the lands, to unite warring factions, and build a realm that might endure. But ambition has a way of feeding on itself, and Uther's was no exception. He became restless, wary of every slight, and saw enemies where there were none. And then came Igraine. Igraine, wife of Duke Gorlois of Cornwall. She was a woman of grace and quiet strength, bound by loyalty and honour to her husband. Uther's eyes found her at court, and from that moment, nothing else mattered. What began as admiration quickly turned to something darker. His desire burned hot, consuming every rational thought. Igraine became not a person, but a fixation, a fire he stoked with every passing glance. Now, I've seen many kings brought low by desire, but Uther's was a flame that threatened to devour everything. His gaze lingered too long. His words, when spoken, carried a weight they should not have. Those around him saw the change. Some whispered of madness, others of ambition turned rotten. For Uther, though, there was no turning back. He was a king, used to taking what he wanted, and what he wanted now stood beyond his reach. Gorlois, no fool, saw the danger too. He knew the king's intentions were a threat, not just to his wife, but to all he held dear. So, he did what any man of honor would do. He gathered Igraine and retreated to Tintagel. a fortress carved from stone and sea. There, on the cliffs of Cornwall, he made his stand. Tintagel was no ordinary place. Its walls were a shield, its heights an unspoken defiance. To Uther, it was an insult he could not abide. Thus the kingdom found itself teetering on the edge. A king whose desires blinded him, a duke who stood firm, and a woman caught between duty and the ambitions of men. All of Albion watched as these fates collided, knowing that when kings play at love and war, it is the realm that suffers most. Desperation has a way of making even the mighty kneel. Uther Pendragon, king of Albion, conqueror of many, found himself consumed by a longing he could neither quench nor conquer. Tintagel stood firm, and Gaulois' defiance was a thorn he could not pull free. Days turned into restless nights, and every thought led back to the one thing he could not possess. Finally, when even ambition and pride brought him no solace, he sought me out. I remember the night well. The air held the scent of earth after rain, and the trees stood watchful and silent, their ancient presence heavy in the stillness. Uther came cloaked and alone. Gone was the proud king who commanded armies. In his place stood a man driven by desire, his gaze haunted by what he could not hold.
Merlin,
He said, his voice strained.
I need your aid.
I regarded him carefully. What he sought was as plain as the tide's pull. Aye, as if he thought he could cloak a tempest in a veil. Such is the folly of kings. A heart that begs is a perilous thing. It sees but one path straight to its desire and treads it blind to the wreckage it leaves behind.
You covet a flower atop the highest cliff.
I replied.
Uther, heed this. The bloom is alluring, but the ascent is treacherous and the edges unforgiving. Many a man has fallen, not from reaching too little, but from grasping too much.
But he was undeterred, as I knew he would be. His desire had burned too deeply, leaving reason and caution as little more than ashes.
Name your terms.
He demanded. The words fell like stones, heavy, unyielding. He was ready to pay any price, blind to the consequences that loomed in the shadows. I considered him then, not as a king, but as a man driven to the edge of himself.
If you find favor with Igraine, hear these words.
I cautioned him.
Any child born of this accord will fall to my keeping. I shall foster their spirit and steer their fate, which shall not lie within your realm to command.
He barely hesitated. His eyes betrayed the fire within him, the singular focus that knew no bounds.
Agreed. For the flower atop the cliff, I'll endure any path.
He said.
Have your terms, Merlin, but know I am undeterred. Let us see where such paths may lead.
And in that moment, the course of Albion shifted. With the terms set, I turned my craft to the task. Magic is no simple thing. It requires intent and a willingness to shape what the world itself resists. I cast the spell, weaving words that bent reality. Uther's form changed before my eyes. Gone was the king, replaced by the image of Gaulois himself. His face, his voice, his every movement. He was the mirror of the man he sought to replace. And so, disguised by the threads of fate and desire, Uther crossed the threshold of Tintagel. What followed that night would ripple far beyond the walls of that fortress, setting events in motion that neither he nor I could fully see. But such is the nature of bargains. They are never truly sealed, and they always ask for more. fate has a way of binding moments together. The fall of one stone sends ripples through an entire pond. While Uther, cloaked in the guise of Gaulois, crossed the threshold of Tintagel, the true duke stood upon the battlefield. The night was cold, the kind that sinks deep into a man's bones. Yet Gaulois met it with unwavering resolve. He had led his men to hold back the king's advance. He fought not for ambition, but for honour, for the safety of his wife, and for a truth he would not bend. The clash of steel rang out beneath a sky heavy with storm clouds. Gaulois was no stranger to battle. His blade met every strike with precision, each movement a testament to the years he had given to protect his lands. But even the strongest shields will crack beneath a relentless storm. The king's forces pressed in, their numbers vast, their intent clear. Gaulois' men fought fiercely at his side, but the weight of the enemy was too great. In the end, it was not treachery or cowardice that brought him down. It was the sheer force of a king's ambition wielded through many hands. Gaulois fell, his final breath a whisper lost to the wind. There was no glory, no fanfare, just the quiet end of a man who had stood against an unstoppable tide. As Gaulois' lifeblood soaked into the earth, far away, Uther's deception reached its bitter completion. Disguised as the fallen duke, he lay with Igraine. The union he desired was achieved, but at a cost he could not fully grasp. This was not the triumph he believed it to be. It was the birth of tragedy. A thread pulled taut in a web neither he nor I could see to its end. The weight of Gaulois' death rippled through the realm, a silent reminder of what desire, unchecked, can tear apart. And so, one chapter ended, a life snuffed out on the battlefield, while elsewhere the seeds of a new destiny were sown, seeds that would carry both light and shadow in their wake. Some unions are born of love, others of necessity, but this one was crafted from ambition and the ashes of Gaulois' demise. As word of his fall spread, Uther acted swiftly, marrying Igraine with a conqueror's speed. She was no mere prize, but a woman encircled by a fate not of her choosing, a queen crowned amidst blood and deceit. The ceremony was quick, reflecting Uther's impatience. The court watched, uneasy, beneath a veneer of celebration. Power grasped so recklessly leaves a bitter aftertaste. The very air was dense with it. Igraine maintained her poise, her eyes betraying the grief of inescapable duty, while Uther saw only his triumph, blind to the tempest he believed he had contained. Their vows echoed against stone, a paradox of stability born from turmoil. Uther's grip on her hand was not just an embrace, but a claim. To him, a fulfillment of desire. To her, a golden shackle. As the realm adapted to its new queen, whispers of past losses and future fears mingled. I observed, my heart heavy for Igraine. Caught in the wake of Uther's ambition, she bore her chains with dignity. This was the crucible of their fate, where power and loss entwined, seen only by those who watch and wait. And as the threads of their destinies pulled tight, I sensed the stirring of deeper tides beneath them. Change often arrives as a whisper, too quiet for most to hear until it's too late. Such was the night when the child was born. There were no grand declarations or jubilant bells, just a mother, steadfast in her pain, and the new life she brought forth. Igraine bore the weight of it all with a grace hardened by sorrow. and as I stepped forward, the gravity of the moment was not lost on me. In that quiet room, the world shifted, though few would know it. The child's first cries filled the air, and I met Igraine's gaze. No words passed between us. They would have been redundant. She understood that her son's fate was not her own to shape. She held him, her tears falling, a mingling of hope and grief.
His name?
She asked.
Arthur,
I declared.
a name born of ancient Celtic tongues. It means bear, a symbol of strength and courage.
I took the child in my arms. He was more than an infant. He was a fulcrum upon which the future would balance. But for now, he was vulnerable, a boy who needed safety away from the ambitions and courtly schemes.
He must be hidden,
I said softly. The weight of the task was clear to me, for this was no ordinary child. While I was taking steps to secure Arthur's future, Uther's fate took a darker turn. Within the walls of Camelot, betrayal brewed as shadows closed in around the king. His reign, marked by conquest and the burning desire for Igraine, had made him as many enemies as allies. In a swift and cruel twist of fate, Uther was slain, caught unawares, not in battle, but by the treachery that festers in the quiet corners of his own castle. The news of his death came to me as a cold whisper, just as I was departing with the child. Uther's passing marked an end to his tumultuous rule, and the beginning of a kingdom adrift. With Uther gone, Camelot had become a stage of ambition and betrayal. The lords circled like carrion birds, each convinced their claim to the throne was just. It was a grim display of power's allure gnawing at the bones of what once held promise. I moved among them, knowing that words alone would not bind their restless hands. They needed something greater, a symbol beyond the reach of blades and schemes. As the shadows of power grew long and dark across Camelot, it became perilously clear that the royal nursery was no place for a newborn heir. Thus, under the cloak of night, I spirited away the infant Arthur, destined for more than just the confines of a crumbling court. Our destination lay far from the scheming lords and whispering walls, in the verdant embrace of Sir Ector's lands. This knight, though of no royal lineage, was rich in virtues that the highborn often lack: steadfast honesty, unwavering loyalty, and a wisdom rooted deep as the ancient oaks on his land. Sir Ector's holdings, sprawling across lush fields and ancient woodlands, promised a realm where one could learn the essence of rulership rooted in the rhythms of the natural world. Here, Arthur would come to understand leadership not as dominion, but as stewardship, guiding and guarding with diligence and compassion. In this setting, far from the thirst for power that now consumed Camelot, the boy would learn to value the quiet strength of justice and the enduring might of honor. The lessons he would absorb in this pastoral haven were to form the bedrock of his future reign, teaching him that true authority arises from service and wisdom, not merely the lineage into which one is born. My return to Camelot was a descent into the fractured heart of a realm whose unity had been sundered with the fall of its king. The lords of the land, like stones once held firmly by Uther's iron will, now shifted restlessly in his absence. It became evident that words of peace would not suffice to stave off the chaos. A firmer sign was needed, a beacon to test those who sought to lead. Under the ancient boughs, where the silent testimony of centuries lay thick upon the ground, I began a task of monumental import. With deliberate hands, I forged a sword, channeling into its creation the oldest and most profound enchantments known to those who walk the mystical paths. This was no ordinary blade. It vibrated with a destiny yet unspoken, imbued with a solemn duty to discern the true heir amid the clamour of pretenders. As I melded the blade with a venerable stone, emblematic of the steadfast earth itself, my thoughts turned towards the future monarch.
True leadership
I mused aloud to the listening forest.
demands virtues far beyond the might of arms. It requires the wisdom to govern justly and the grace to bear the immense burdens of rule.
With the sword now anchored firmly in stone, the grove took on an air of expectant stillness, as if time itself had paused to witness the creation of this trial. I declared to the encroaching twilight,
Here stands a test not merely of strength, but of the soul. This challenge shall sift the true sovereign from the throng of those who merely seek power.
as the shadows deepened, I receded into the quiet watchfulness of the grove, the newly set sword gleaming, a beacon of potential kingship and a testament to the virtues required of it.
Let them come.
I whispered into the chill of the night, my voice carrying a mix of challenge and prophecy.
In their striving, let them reveal their true mettle.
And so I waited, the keeper of this profound secret, as the grove held its breath in anticipation. The sword, silent and solemn, stood ready to test the hearts and wills of those who would dare claim leadership. It was not just a monarch that this test would reveal, but the very essence of what it means to rule. In the stillness that followed, I remained, a sentinel, guarding the unfolding fate of Camelot, watching as destiny prepared to unfold its next chapter at the hands of those bold enough to answer the call of the sword in the stone.